Awesome. Thanks, Shannon. So we are going to, like Shannon said, learn about big cats of Florida, of which we only have 2 that we will go through today. So we're going to talk about the bobcat and the Florida panther, and we'll be going through each of these items for each of the species, starting with habitat, going through appearance, evidence, their diet, breeding and reproduction, and then of course we always like to incorporate a little piece on how you can help. So we're going to jump right in, starting off with the bobcats, which, like I said, are one of the 2 native wildcat species that we have here in Florida. And although we might not get to see them as much as we would like, their populations aren't currently under threat to the point where they are listed as threatened or endangered at the state or federal level, which is a good thing. And there's several different subspecies throughout all of North America when it comes to bobcats. We have our own distinct subspecies here in Florida, so you can see that in the scientific name, the subspecies FLORIDANUS there. And they are considered solitary animals, really only coming together when they breed. So, you know, if you see more than one together, that's awesome. It's probably either mom with their kittens or, like I said, when they're breeding and with their mate. So in terms of habitat, they're considered generalists. They can pretty much survive in any habitat here in Florida, and including kind of the upland forests as well as wetland swamp ecosystems. But what's really, I think, aided in their populations not being listed as threatened or endangered is that they've had the ability, because of that, to adapt to survive even in urban areas. So I'm over in Pinellas County, the most densely populated county in the state, and I get questions about bobcats all throughout the year. Some people send me pictures and things like that, so it's pretty cool that they are able to adapt in that way. And they are excellent climbers as well, and they can swim, which kind of is counterintuitive for those of you that have domestic cats at home that hate the water. Bobcats will swim to get from point A to point B, or even in search of prey. And if you ever have seen people posting pictures of bobcats resting up in trees, that is a common place they'll hang out just to be up and away from any potential predators or threats. And sometimes they'll just sun up there, or in general just rest up in trees. So in terms of den and nesting sites, they prefer really dense vegetation. So fortunately here in Florida's natural areas, palmetto thickets are a favorite of bobcats, as well as just any areas that are dense with vegetation. And they will also take advantage of logs as they've hollowed out, or trees that have fallen down and rotted from the inside out to find shelter. And they will sometimes have more than one den or resting site and location that they use. And this actually, as I was creating this presentation one day on my way home, I work at Brooker Creek Preserve up in Tarpon Springs, which is the largest remaining natural area in our county. And I got to see this. A cute little bobcat, juvenile bobcat, crossing the road. He was fortunate. I kind of startled him with my car, and he stopped and looked at me, and I had time to take out my phone and get that little clip. So I wanted to share that with you. So they are here. They're around, even though we might not see them that often. Oops, don't want to play that again. So we will, before we continue on, Shannon will pop up our first poll question for you. Just a simple true or false. The home range, or the area that a bobcat needs to live and find everything it needs to survive, is larger in an urban area versus a rural area. So the majority of you got it correct. The answer is false. I know it's kind of worded a little strange, but basically what's kind of cool and unique, this also applies to coyotes as well, but the home range or area that the bobcats need to find, food, water, cover, shelter, is actually smaller in an urban area compared to a rural area. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it in terms of food, water, cover, shelter. So if they have say, access to pet food that's outside your house, and they can live under your front porch and drink out of your pool. I mean, not ideal, but you know, they have access to those resources in an urban setting in a lot closer proximity than they do in a natural setting where they have to go a little bit further to find those resources. In general, the home range of males is larger than that of females, and but they will overlap, and that's how they find their mates. And males are very territorial, so they'll mark their territory through a variety of mechanisms, what we call scent posts, and that can either be through their urine, their scat, or scratchings, whether that's on the ground or on trees. So people will often call in either to Shannon or I saying that they've seen a Florida panther, and people often confuse these two species, which is why we're doing this webinar. So we're going to kind of go through some just basics of how these animals actually look and how to tell them apart. So in general, bobcats are much smaller than the Florida panther, but about twice as big as a domestic cat, if any of you have cats at home. About 2 to 4 feet long, males, again, generally bigger than females, and like I said, much smaller than panthers, about 3 to 4 times smaller than a Florida panther. And they get their name from their tails, which are very short, so think like a bobbed haircut. Short tails, that's where they get their name. They can be up to 1 foot long, but they tend to be smaller than that. They have 2 to 3, let's see if I can find my mouse, there it is, black bars at the tip of their tail, and their tail often when they're walking is kind of kinked up, and so you can actually see a white underside to the tail as well. In terms of their coat, it's more red in appearance and kind of tinted more red than a Florida panther, and it also is covered in tiny little spots. People describe it differently, but it's much more speckled than the solid coat of a Florida panther, and they do have a white belly. And then what's really cool, if you ever see a bobcat from behind, they have these really cool ears. It's almost like they have these giant fake eyeballs on the back of their ears. So it's a solid black ear, but with a giant white spot in the middle. So you can see that. These are some trail camera images that we have here at the preserve. So for those of you that might not be fortunate enough to see a physical bobcat, we might see evidence of bobcats. So some things that you can look for. One is their tracks. So in general, they're just over 1 inch in both length and width. And if you were to trace an outline of the track, it would be very circular. So we say they have very round tracks. And then between the tracks, if you have that opportunity to see a full track or a path of tracks, it's about 9 to 13 inches between the spacing between the tracks. And with all cat prints, so for the panther and the bobcat, and if you even think about your cats at home, they have claws that are able to be retracted, and they only come out when they want. So when they're walking around, typically they will not leave a claw mark in their track. So that's a distinguishing characteristic from, say, like a coyote track or another species. And that's not always the case, but typically there are not claw tracks in the marking. And then scat, when it comes to scat, again, if you have cats at home, it looks very similar to domestic cat scat, but the distinguishing characteristic with bobcat scat, say, compared to a coyote, is that it's very segmented. So you can see in the image down here, it's like tiny little segments within their scat. And they will, again, like domestic cats that bury their scat in the litter, bobcats will do the same with just the natural debris. So in terms of their diet, they're considered opportunistic feeders, again, aiding in their ability to survive in urban settings, but rabbits, squirrels, and rats are probably at the top of their list in terms of their diet, but they'll also feed on things like possums, smaller raccoons. In the wintertime, when we have lots of migratory birds coming through Florida, that their diet kind of shifts to incorporate more birds. They will also feed upon feral cats and deer. If they do feed on deer, it would be the young fawns, And that's less often the case, but it has been documented. Then in terms of hunting, so cats, both panthers and bobcats, really rely on their sight and hearing, unlike something like a coyote, again, that really relies on their sense of smell. So bobcats are considered nocturnal, hunting at night. They'll also be really active at dawn and dusk as well. And they tend to use the same hunting pathway, so they kind of start to form a trail. They're a little bit repetitive in those approaches when they're going out to hunt. If they do catch smaller prey, they typically eat it right away, but they will also do something called caching their prey. So if they get something larger, so maybe say like a fawn, that they might not be able to consume the whole thing at once or don't want to, they'll kind of bury it in some dense vegetation, try and cover it up, and come back and revisit to feed later on. And they do have the ability to, like, if food is not available for whatever reason, that's not a huge threat to them, they are able to fast for quite a bit of time. So in terms of breeding, our second poll question, when do you think peak breeding season is for bobcats in Florida? And you guys are good, yes. So the majority of you got it correct. It is February and March is peak breeding season. So not to say some of you were also correct in terms of their general breeding season, which goes from August, so now through March, but the peak is February and March, so towards the latter end of that range. And they're able to breed after just 1 year of age, which is pretty unique, but when we get to their lifespan, that'll make a little bit more sense. And then they have about a 2-month gestation period. So again, if you follow the peak breeding season, most young would be born in April and May. And average, they have 2 to 3 kittens, but anywhere from 1 to 4 is what's been documented. And typically only 1 litter a year, though it has been reported that mother will have 2 litters within 1 year. Aren't they cute? They're so cute. I love that picture. So in terms of once the kittens are born, dad is not in the picture. At this point, they're raised by mom pretty much until the next breeding season, about 6 to 8 months. They'll stay with mom. They'll learn how to hunt and survive before they go off and kind of start to establish their own territory. And then, so I alluded to this before, but life expectancy for bobcats is only 3 to 4 years in the wild, so not very long. The oldest and longest record, the oldest record on record is 16 years. And kittens in general aren't surviving due to predation, whether it's foxes, coyotes, owls, or other male bobcats. And then once they're adults, it shifts more to us, whether it's hunting, vehicles, or domestic dogs. And then how you can help bobcats. So we recommend that you revisit our backyard habitat webinar, the 10 tips for success. Because that home range of bobcats is so small, we are able to help support them even in an urban setting. So you can check out those tips, and then some other things to consider: avoid using poisons to kill rodents. Remember, that's on their top of their prey list. Securing your garbage cans to prevent any potential nuisance bobcats. And the same goes for the other two, protecting any livestock you might have, whether it's chickens or goats, and keeping your pet food inside. Okay, so now we are going to switch gears to the Florida panther, which again is our other native wildcat species. Unfortunately, this one is listed as endangered at the federal level, and that's been the case since the late 1960s. So it's been an ongoing battle to keep their population stable. Currently, estimates are anywhere from 120 to 230 in the state of Florida. And similar to the bobcat, we have here a separate subspecies here in Florida. So that's why we call it the Florida panther. And if you're ever on Jeopardy and get asked, it is our official state animal. So in terms of range, there's 2 different maps here. The one on the left showing some different subspecies ranges, but you can focus in on the pink here. So that's the historical range of the Florida panther. So you can see it covered several states, but then if you zoom in to the map on the right, so the blue you can see for that on that bottom bullet is known occurrences of panthers here in Florida, and the orange is breeding, which you can see heavily takes place mostly in the southwest part of the state, and pretty much panther populations in general are found only south of Orlando. And it should be noted, of all those subspecies, the Florida panther is the only one found east of the Mississippi River. So again, similar to the bobcat, the panthers are habitat generalists. They can survive in a variety of different habitats, whether it's drier upland areas or swamp areas. They'll even adapt to agricultural areas, large open rangelands, and prefer, again, similar to bobcats, really dense palmetto thickets for their den and resting areas. And they don't create, an actual den. They pretty much, it's just like over time and visiting a particular site, it starts to like flatten out. So they just kind of flatten out an area on the ground as their den site. So this is one other way that they're very different from bobcats. So take a guess at what you think the typical home range for a male Florida panther is. You guys are good. Yes, so 160 to 200 square miles. So you can, if you remember back to the bobcat, which is only 5 to 6 square miles, so significantly larger area required for a panther to find what it needs to survive. So despite them being habitat generalists, they need a vast area of land. So that's a big limitation for the Florida panther. So again, the 160 to 200 was for a male. The home range for females is much smaller, only 50 to 70 square miles. And really, again, that range will depend on just what's available within the particular habitat. Similar to bobcats, the males are very territorial. They'll mark their territory through the same mechanisms as a bobcat, and kind of tell the other male panthers, this is my area and you should stay away. And then the females do a similar kind of scent post when they are in heat to indicate to the males they are available and ready. So in terms of size alone, I mentioned that panthers are significantly larger, 3 to 4 times larger than bobcats. So you can see males anywhere from 100 to 160 pounds. Females are smaller, only 70 to 100 pounds. In terms of their height off the ground, a little over 2 feet. And then if you measure them from the nose to the tip of their tail, it goes anywhere from 6 to 7 feet. But the tail makes up a huge portion of that. So if you note here, just looking at the image, they do not have a bobbed tail. It's very, very long, as much as 2/3 of the length of their body. Their tails can be long, and they, similar to the bobcats, their tail is tipped in black. And then their color, though, overall, they don't have the speckles or spots like a bobcat. They tend to refer to their color as tawny, so kind of like a orangish brown, yellowish brown color, solid throughout, with a little bit lighter coloration on the inner legs and belly. So again, especially in the case of the Florida panther, extremely rare to see them. I have personally never seen one in the wild. You're more likely to see evidence of bobcats if you're in that particular part of the state where they're found. So in terms of their tracks, it'll be similar in terms of if you were to outline their track, it'll be pretty round. Their front paw tends to be more round. Their back paw tends to be a little bit more oval. But in terms of size, it's double the size of a bobcat. We're talking over 3 inches, both in length and width. And in terms of, kind of the overlap between a bobcat and a panther, by the time a panther kitten leaves the den, the tracks are already going to be larger than that of an adult bobcat. So, and then the spread between the tracks will be significantly larger for a panther, so 25 to 40 inches between tracks, and similar tend not to leave claw marks, though you can see in this sample here, it depends on the medium, like the soil that they're walking on or if they're running. Sometimes it'll fall just right where the claws will leave a mark, so don't let that completely rule anything out. And in terms of their scat, highly variable depending on their diet, and they do tend to feed on the organs of their prey first, which tends to result in a different type of scat than when they get into kind of the more meatier substance of their prey. But in general, it's about twice the size of bobcats, so we're talking almost as much as 1.5 inches thick, and can be 10 inches long. It's not often that long, but tends to be twisted, tapered at the ends. Again, highly variable, but large. And in terms of their diet, so raccoons, deer, and we're talking mature deer, and wild hogs make up 70% of the diet of the Florida panther. And then you can see they'll also prey on armadillos, rodents, possums, domestic cats, rabbits, and birds on occasion. Kittens of the Florida panther tend to prefer armadillos and rabbits. A little bit easier prey items. They are similar to bobcats in terms of their hunting, mostly relying on sight as well as hearing. But the Florida panther has round pupils, which enables them to have the ability to hunt efficiently both during the day and at night. So they're not restricted as much like the bobcats to only hunting at night. They're considered crepuscular, being most active at dawn and dusk when their prey are also most active. And similar to bobcats, pretty much solitary unless they are hunting with their kittens. Okay, and our last poll question, true or false? The Florida panther is monogamous. All right, I think that's everyone. Perfect. Yes. So the majority of you also got that one correct. They are not monogamous. It's pretty rare, actually, in kind of the mammal world that species are monogamous, pretty much with the exception of coyotes. So they're considered polygamous, meaning that they will mate with multiple partners, and they'll only stay together for about a week during that time, kind of through the breeding process. They are a little bit longer in terms of reaching sexual maturity than bobcats. So for females, anywhere from 1.5 years to 2.5 years, and males a little bit longer at 3. And their gestation period is also about a month longer than that of a bobcat. So anywhere from 92 to 96 days. Similar to bobcats in that they have 1 to 4 kittens on average, and they're usually born March through July, but it is pretty even throughout the year, but that is the kind of the peak for when panther kittens are born. And so females raise young alone, males are out of the picture once they've mated and done their business, pretty much only leaving kittens to hunt. They'll leave them at their den site and the kittens will stay with their mom for about 2 years before they go off and establish their own range. Males kind of tend to get kicked out a little bit earlier than the females, but they do look very similar to bobcats when they're kittens. So they have this speckled, spotted coat, they have blue eyes, and ringed tails. So that's probably when you're most likely to potentially confuse them, but those do fade after about 6 months, and then they'll lose their spots, their eyes turn brown, and they'll start to take on the appearance of an adult panther. So in terms of life expectancy with the Florida panther, they can live up to 20 years. 10 is more common, but unfortunately vehicle collisions is a major threat to the Florida panther, and other panthers, mostly male on male combat, is also plays a big factor in mortality. But the vehicle collisions so prior to 2000, the average was 6 per year that were killed by vehicles, and that's jumped up to 34 per year since 2000. So it's gone up quite a bit as we've gotten more vehicles and cars on the road, but also the panther population has been increasing during that time, increasing the chances. So it's kind of a delicate balance there, but obviously with them being federally listed as endangered, any mortality that we can prevent is helpful. So how can you help? There's tons of research that's being done on Florida panthers, has been, continues to be. So if you do see a Florida panther, that's helpful information for the Florida Fish and Wildlife. And they do have a place where you can report sightings online. So Shannon can push that link out, or we'll be sure to send it to you in the follow-up email. And it's kind of cool just to check out the map either way, if you don't live in a part of the state where you see them. And then there's lots of different ways that you can support this research financially if you're interested in that, as well as supporting what we call wildlife corridors. So you recall that panthers need a huge area of land to survive in their home range. And so anything we can do to connect public and private lands through land trusts and other efforts is always helpful. So you can consider supporting those efforts as well in whatever way is feasible for you. Oh, and that's it. So, sorry, Shannon. So lots of information about both of these really awesome wildcat species that we're fortunate to have here in Florida. And we will get into Q&A, but first we're just gonna ask you to complete a quick poll